Welcome to the second video in our video series focused on the Gospel of Mark. Not only are we studying the biblical text of the Gospel of Mark, we are also exploring the theme of discipleship as it is developed throughout the book, walking in the way of Jesus, walking the way of discipleship. Our purpose is to call believers today to walk also with Jesus in the way of discipleship. We begin our study in chapter 1 and verse 21. We will conclude in chapter 2 and verse 12, although in reality we will say a few things that extend beyond the story of the healing and the pardon of the paralytic in chapter 2, verses 1 through 12. The first thing I would like to note with you has to do with how the text of Mark is constructed as we begin in chapter 1 and verse 21, after the selection of the first four disciples, Peter and Andrew, James and John. We see Jesus beginning in the city of Capernaum. I would call that phase 1, an unclean spirit is cast out on the Sabbath day. No Sabbath day controversy is introduced, but it is noted that the casting out of the unclean spirit occurs on the Sabbath. On the same day, after they leave the synagogue, Peter's mother-in-law is also healed. That would also be a healing on the Sabbath. Immediately after those two stories, both of which occur in Capernaum, we come to verse 29, the story of Jesus healing Peter's mother. Verse 32 says that the evening after sunset, the people brought to Jesus those who were sick and the demon-possessed, and Jesus healed those who had diseases, and he drove out many demons. That is somewhat of a summary of the healing of the sick and the casting out, the driving out of the demons. And we immediately have a transition to Galilee. Another note that he was capable of casting out demons and of healing, but he travels through Galilee preaching in their synagogues and driving out demons, verse 39. And so it is in Galilee that a leper is healed, and we are introduced to the theme of Mark's gospel, the idea of touch. He has already touched Peter's mother-in-law. Now he touches the unclean leper who comes to him in Galilee. When we come to the text of chapter 1 and verses 40 through 45, the leper who comes to Jesus, Jesus has power over leprosy, and we note that Jesus sends him to the temple, to the religious leaders, to receive purification according to the law of the Old Testament. So the leper is healed, and that is what I see as the end of phase 1. When we come to chapter 2 and verse 1, we begin phase 2, the healing, the forgiving of a paralytic. Jesus will no longer travel through the villages around Capernaum, the villages of Galilee, but now he will stay by the lakeside. We will find him walking through the fields, and his disciples are not fasting. We will see him in the encounter with the Jewish leaders talking about the Sabbath. We will find him in the synagogue in chapter 3, verses 1 through 6, healing a man with a withered hand also on the Sabbath. And so I have used indentation to help you see something of the construction of the text. The two major points both are from Capernaum. The things that follow seem to be part of a cycle. After we complete the first cycle, then we will move to the second cycle. So here we are in Capernaum, chapter 1 and verse 21, Jesus with power over evil spirits, and they recognize him. They ask the question, have you come to destroy us? And the answer is not given, but the answer is yes. That's exactly why Jesus has come. He has come to establish the kingdom. He has come to call disciples so that people might be rescued from the kingdom of darkness. That's not a Markan thought. That's a thought that comes to us from the book of Colossians. But Jesus comes translating people, transforming people, moving people from the kingdom of darkness to the kingdom of light. Those in the kingdom, those who will choose the way of discipleship, are empowered to oppose the structures of evil, just as Jesus opposed Satan in the wilderness. The Bible says in chapter 1 and verse 22 that all of them were admiring him. That is a word that occurs in 122. It is repeated in 622, 737, 1026, 1118. Another word that is used in verse 27 is that they were amazed, or your translation may say they were astonished. One of the things I would really like to have happen as you study Mark with me in this video series, I would love for us to reach a point where we are admiring Jesus, the man who has come, bringing good news, calling us to the way of discipleship, translating us into the kingdom of Jesus Christ. What would happen if we could genuinely read the stories afresh and we too could be amazed? Something worth noting as we look at the text of chapter 1, and especially the story of the casting out of the unclean spirit, we've already seen the declaration in 1:1 that Jesus is the Son of God, the beginning of the gospel of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. In chapter 1 and verse 11, we read that it was clearly declared at his baptism, this is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. And yet there is a theme that surfaces in our studies of the Gospel of Mark, which is sometimes called the Messianic secret. So when we come to verses 24 and 25, verses 43 through 45, the unclean spirit cast out, the leper healed, they are told not to declare who Jesus is. Those who know who Jesus is are not to tell, even though we have heard the declaration in chapter 1, verse 1, chapter 1, and verse 11. The man who is healed is countered by the healing of Peter's mother-in-law, a woman. Jesus has power over infirmities, over illness. Once again, I note that he touches her, he takes her by the hand. And then in a summary statement, before he leaves Capernaum, many sick are healed, many demon-possessed have the demons cast out of them, and he moves over to Galilee. And as he is preaching and casting out demons, we see the purpose of Jesus coming. We see what will be the nature of his ministry as he both shares amazing words in preaching and amazing works in healing and casting out demons. And in his ministry in Galilee, a leper comes to him. Jesus has power over leprosy. We see repeated the theme of touch. Jesus also touches the leper. I've already noted that after his healing, he is sent to the religious leaders, to the priests, so that he might receive purification, be declared pure according to the law. And so with those stories from chapter 1, we come to what I would call phase 2 of this first section. We see that the events that are recounted are related to the summary that we read in chapter 1, 38, and 39. In chapter 2 and verse 1, Jesus is in the house back in Capernaum, perhaps in his own house, most likely in the house of Peter. And we're going to once again come face to face with this question, who is Jesus? Thinking about the person of Jesus, thinking about the nature of Jesus, and thinking about his mission. And the controversy that he has with the Jewish leaders is very, very clearly focused. As we think about the text, we remember the story of the four friends who are willing to make a hole in the roof so that the paralytic can be let down into the midst of the house. They could not get into the house. They could not get to Jesus, chapter 2, verse 4, because of the crowd. Jesus saw their faith and says to the paralytic, "Your sons are forgiven." There are two events that occur in the same context. First, Jesus says, "Son, your sins are forgiven." This is not his healing. This is a statement of his forgiveness in order to show that the Son of Man has authority to forgive sins. But the teachers, the leaders, the Jewish leaders who were standing around failing to understand exactly what has happened, they asked the wrong question. They asked the question, why does this fellow talk like that? This is blasphemy. Who can forgive sins but God alone? They asked the wrong question. The right question would be, could this be God? Could this man actually be God? Forgiveness by Jesus was the point of division between Judaism and Christianity. When we think about the fact that the Gospel of Mark was intended for the church very near the middle of the first century, probably around AD 50, perhaps a bit later, when we think about the context, we realize that the church was experiencing a great controversy over whether Christians had to continue to follow Jewish teachings, Jewish traditions. That is, whether the Gentiles who became Christians had to be circumcised. In the midst of this context, the controversy between Judaism and Christianity in the early church, Mark writes a gospel, and the point of contention is whether sins are forgiven by Jesus. Jesus shows he has authority, and he does that by healing the man. He does this in chapter 2, verses 10 through 12. He says that you may know, verse 10, that the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins. He said to the paralytic, take up your mat and go home. He heals the man to show his authority to forgive. And they are amazed by who he is and what he does. The text says this amazed everyone, and they praised God, saying, we have never seen anything like this. Jesus will now depart from Capernaum. We will continue the story in the next video. We will continue our study of phase 2, the Jewish controversies that have to do with fasting, with the Sabbath day, with the healing of a man with a withered hand in the synagogue, also on the Sabbath, and we'll eventually come to phase 3 as Jesus spends an increasing amount of time near the seaside, alongside the Sea of Galilee, still in various controversies with the Jewish leaders, but preparing to take the gospel not only to the Jews, but also to the Gentiles. That's getting ahead of our story. We'll get to that soon. In the meantime, I hope that you're being blessed by our study of the gospel. I close by reminding you again of the questions that I want us to discuss in our live class, questions for your journaling, questions for your study, your personal study, as you look at the text beginning in chapter 1, verse 21, through chapter 2, verse 12. What do disciples know? Try to understand who Jesus is, but in a larger sense, what am I learning? What am I to understand? What am I learning mentally? How is my thinking being changed? But not only that, am I able to read the text and feel the same kind of emotion that those who saw Jesus in that day would have felt? And then finally, what is Jesus calling me to do as I walk the way of discipleship? 3 questions that have to do with our thinking, our feeling, our actions. We'll talk about them more. If you can't join us, I pray that they'll be a part also of your study, that you'll be blessed by our study of the Gospel of Mark as we seek also to walk the way of discipleship. Hope to see you soon in the third video. God bless.